4 things happened inside 48 hours. A pass, a game winner, an Instagram post, and then an injury report. On their own, each one of those things is completely unremarkable. A player makes a pass, a teammate hits a big shot, someone posts about it online, and a name shows up on a status report. Happens every week across every professional sports league in the world. But the order these 4 things happened in, the speed at which they happened, and the specific organizational moment they happened inside of, transforms them from 4 unremarkable events into something that the Indiana Fever's leadership cannot explain away with routine sports medicine language. Because when you lay the full timeline out and you force yourself to look at it without the benefit of the doubt that this organization has not earned, what you are looking at is a pattern. And this particular pattern has a very specific shape that anyone who has been paying attention to this franchise all season will recognize immediately. So let's build the timeline from the beginning, because if there is one thing that separates a legitimate conclusion from paranoid speculation, it is the timeline. And the timeline here is not ambiguous. Sophie Cunningham made a pass. That is where this whole thing starts. Late in the game against the Washington Mystics, with the outcome hanging in the balance, Cunningham found Caitlin Clark with a pass that set up a game-winning shot. Clark knocked it down, the Fever won, and the moment between Cunningham and Clark after that shot, the celebration that observers on the ground and watching from home described as something genuinely unscripted, something that felt like 2 competitors sharing a real moment rather than performing one. That moment went public almost instantly. The footage spread fast. The reaction across the fan community was immediate and emotional. People were not just watching a basketball play, they were watching what looked like authentic connection between 2 players in a high-stakes moment. And that authenticity is exactly what made the next 48 hours so loaded with significance. Because what came after that shot is where the story actually begins. Within a short window after the game, Sophie Cunningham posted on Instagram. The specific framing of what she shared included a reference to going rogue, 2 words, and those 2 words detonated across the WNBA fan community like nothing else that had happened this season. Because going rogue in the context of a game-winning play that had just gone viral implied something very specific. It implied that the pass to Clark, the play that produced the win, had not been the designed option. It implied, in other words, that the game-winning sequence the Indiana Fever just celebrated was not something the Indiana Fever coaching staff had actually planned for. That is an enormous implication, and the fan community and the analytical community and the media voices tracking this team all landed on that interpretation simultaneously and immediately. The post became the single most significant piece of insider information the entire WNBA season had produced. It was not a rumor, it was not a leaked report, it was a player, in her own words, on her own platform, sharing something that the organizational context made extraordinarily revealing. For a brief window, Sophie Cunningham had told the world something the Indiana Fever's coaching staff almost certainly did not want told. That window did not stay open long. Within 24 hours, the post was gone, deleted, and Cunningham issued a public statement walking the entire thing back. The explanation offered was that people had read too much into what she shared, that the play was exactly what the coaching staff designed, that the going rogue framing had been misinterpreted by a community that was apparently looking for something that was not there. Now, take that explanation at face value for a moment. Set aside everything you know about how this organization has behaved across this season, and just evaluate the retraction on its own terms. A player posts something, the community interprets it in a specific way. The player comes back and says the interpretation was wrong. That happens. Athletes post things that get taken out of context. Public figures clarify statements that landed differently than intended. That is a normal part of operating in public. But here is what makes this retraction impossible to evaluate in isolation: the speed, the completeness, the precision of the organizational moment it arrived in. This was not a player who took a few days to think about it and decided to clarify something that had been nagging her. This was a post that went viral in the morning and was gone by the next day with a full public retraction attached to it. The organizational machinery moved fast, and organizations that move fast in moments like this are not doing so because they are unconcerned about what was shared. But that was only the first signal. The second one arrived on the injury report. The Indiana Fever released their official status report ahead of the Chicago Sky game. Sophie Cunningham was listed as questionable. The injury designation listed was a right elbow injury. Stop there and ask the most basic question that anyone tracking the situation immediately asked. When did this happen? Not in a conspiratorial way, not with an agenda, just as a straightforward, factual inquiry. When did Sophie Cunningham sustain a right elbow injury? Was there a practice incident, a collision during individual workouts, a specific documented physical event that produced enough discomfort to require a questionable designation for the next game? The official injury report does not answer any of those questions. It simply lists the designation, and the timing of that designation arriving in the precise organizational window following the Instagram post, the deletion, the retraction, and the broader drama surrounding the game-winning pass is a timing that this franchise's documented behavior across an entire season makes extraordinarily difficult to accept as coincidence. The fan community's reaction to that injury report was not measured. It was not wait and see. It was immediate, it was unified, and it pointed directly at one interpretation. Cunningham's elbow became questionable because of what she did with Clark on that final possession and what she subsequently shared on Instagram before the organizational response shut it down. That is what the fan community concluded, and when you look at everything that preceded it, that conclusion is not paranoid. It is not conspiratorial. It is a reasonable inference drawn from a specific, documented, observable pattern of behavior that this organization has been building all season long. And that pattern did not start with Sophie Cunningham. Scott Agness has covered the Indiana Fever longer than almost anyone. He is the franchise's most experienced beat reporter. His access, his sourcing, and his credibility within Indiana Fever coverage are not in question. What is in question is what happened to his credentials. Agness had his press access revoked specifically in response to providing accurate information to fans about Caitlin Clark's availability that the organization had not yet chosen to release publicly. Read that again carefully. He reported something accurate, something true, something that fans had a legitimate interest in knowing, and the organization responded by pulling his credentials. Not because he got something wrong, not because he violated a specific media policy in a way that was clearly defined and consistently applied, but because he released accurate information at a moment the organization found inconvenient. The credential revocation arrived swiftly and decisively. The organizational message it sent was impossible to misread. This is what happens when you release information we have not authorized. That message was received by everyone covering this team. Then there's Lexie Hull. Hull is a player with a documented, close, personal friendship with Caitlin Clark. She is also a player whose shooting efficiency data and production numbers have, throughout the season, justified significantly more playing time than she has received. The discrepancy between what Hull produces when she is on the floor and the minutes she actually gets has been a subject of sustained analytical attention from the fan community. And the connection that community has drawn between Hull's friendship with Clark and her limited deployment is not a leap. It is an observation grounded in a specific, documented pattern of behavior that becomes harder and harder to attribute to pure basketball judgment the more the season progresses. Hull's situation is one that observers are now watching with the kind of pointed attention that the Cunningham injury designation has only intensified. And then there is Stephanie White. The Indiana Fever's head coach made an appearance on a specific radio platform. That platform had previously been associated with commentary that was sharply critical of Caitlin Clark.
White's decision to appear there, in the context of everything swirling around Clark this season, is itself an organizational communication. Not because coaches cannot choose where they do media, but because in a season where a sustained negative characterization of Clark's personality, character, and professionalism has circulated across multiple platforms, the head coach's platform choices carry meaning that goes beyond simple media relations. During that appearance, White was asked directly about the game-winning shot and whether it helped Clark break through some of the noise surrounding her. White's response was measured, diplomatic, and careful. She acknowledged the win, praised Clark's shot, praised Cunningham's pass, and moved on. What she did not do was address the noise directly. What she did not do was offer any defense of her franchise player against a characterization campaign that has been running for weeks. The appearance choice and the response together communicate something about the organizational culture's relationship to that campaign, and the fan and analytical communities have not missed it. Because here is the fact that reveals more about this organization than any single incident this season. The Indiana Fever moves within 24 hours to produce a player retraction when an Instagram post threatens to complicate the organizational narrative around the coaching staff. They revoke press credentials within days of accurate reporting they find inconvenient. They list a player as questionable on an injury report in a timing window that the full context makes deeply suspicious. But they have not produced a single public statement defending Caitlin Clark against characterizations that directly attack her reputation, her character, and her professionalism. Not one. The organization that acts fast when its own image is at risk has been completely silent while its franchise player absorbs a sustained public smear. That asymmetry is the single most revealing organizational fact this entire season has produced.
They protect the narrative around the front office. They do not protect Clark. The locker room footage from after the game-winning shot added another dimension to an already complicated picture. Observers who described the atmosphere in that setting noted that the reaction did not reflect the kind of unified, uncomplicated team celebration that a last-second comeback road victory would normally produce. The atmosphere described was more subdued, more complicated, more suggestive of an internal organizational environment where certain outcomes and certain interpersonal moments between specific players are processed through a cultural filter that the public has been observing and documenting all season. When Cunningham and Clark were celebrating on the court, when that shared moment was playing out in front of cameras and fans, something that the people inside that building were apparently reading very differently than the people watching from the outside. The going rogue framing matters here more than it might initially appear, because going rogue implies a shared understanding. It implies that Cunningham and Clark both knew, in that moment, that what happened had gone outside the organizational script. It implies that the pass was a choice, a deliberate deviation from whatever the play design called for, made in the heat of competition by a player who trusted her teammate more than she trusted the play. That kind of in-game decision-making happens constantly in basketball. Players read situations and make choices that go outside the designed structure all the time. What made this one different was that Cunningham then acknowledged it publicly. She put words to it. She framed it as going rogue, and in doing so, she gave the public a window into an organizational dynamic that the Indiana Fever had clearly preferred to keep closed. The response to that window being opened was swift, organized, and unmistakable in its implications. The post came down, the retraction went up, and then Cunningham's elbow became questionable. Every person paying attention understands what that sequence communicates. Here is the complete organizational portrait that This Week constructed, stated plainly and without diplomatic softening, because the full record demands that it be stated this way. This is an organization that revoked press credentials in response to accurate reporting it found inconvenient, that has deployed minutes for a player in ways that cannot be justified by production data alone, in a pattern that correlates with that player's visible friendship with Clark.
that had its head coach appearing on a platform connected to anti-Clark commentary during a sustained public attack on Clark's reputation, that moved within 24 hours to retract a player's viral Instagram post about a game-winning play involving Clark, that listed that same player as questionable with a right elbow injury in the precise organizational window following the retraction drama, and that has maintained complete silence about a sustained negative characterization of its own franchise player, while responding publicly and actively to every other organizational criticism directed at the coaching staff and front office. Every single item in that list is documented. Every connection is grounded in observable, time-stamped organizational behavior. There is no speculation required to build that record. It builds itself from the publicly available facts. The conclusion the fan and analytical community has drawn from that record is not extreme. It is the conclusion that the weight of the evidence points toward when you evaluate it honestly and without the organizational benefit of the doubt that this franchise has systematically forfeited through its own choices. The Indiana Fever appears to be managing player behavior in ways that extend significantly beyond normal sports communications, and the mechanism being used, injury designations, credential revocations, social media pressure, minutes decisions, is sophisticated enough that each individual instance can be defended in isolation. That is precisely why the pattern is so important to name, because the pattern is what the individual defenses cannot account for. The warning about Lexie Hull needs to be stated directly because the Cunningham situation has made it more urgent. Hull's minutes have been a subject of concern all season. The discrepancy between her production and her deployment has never been satisfactorily explained through basketball analysis alone. If the organizational dynamic includes an implied cost for players who demonstrate visible alignment with Clark, Hull's position within that dynamic is the one that every observer will be watching most closely going forward. Because if that cost is real, and the documented evidence suggests strongly that something is real, then Hull, as the player with perhaps the most visible personal connection to Clark on the roster, occupies the most exposed position in that organizational environment. Every rotation decision involving Hull, every game where her minutes do not reflect her production, is now being watched against the full backdrop of everything this season has documented. The pattern is established, the mechanism is visible, and the community tracking this situation is not going to look away.
Sophie Cunningham made a pass to Caitlin Clark. Clark hit the game winner. Cunningham posted about going rogue. The post came down within 24 hours. Cunningham publicly retracted, and then Cunningham appeared on the injury report as questionable with a right elbow designation for the next game. That is the sequence, laid out plainly, in order, with nothing added and nothing taken away. The Indiana Fever can describe that sequence as routine sports medicine management combined with a player clarifying a misunderstood post. They can offer that explanation, and they have the organizational standing to offer it. But the people who've been watching this franchise all season, who've documented the credential revocation and the minutes decisions and the platform appearances and the sustained silence around the Clark smear campaign, those people are not evaluating the injury report in isolation. They are evaluating it as the latest entry in a documented record of organizational behavior that has been building toward exactly this kind of moment all season long. And the explanation the organization is offering does not hold up against the weight of that record. The writing has been on the wall for months. This week, someone finally handed the organization a marker and made them write it themselves. The pass went to Clark. Clark made the shot. Cunningham has a questionable elbow, and the Indiana Fever's leadership is hoping that the people paying attention will eventually stop connecting dots that have been sitting in plain sight since the very beginning of this season. They will not stop. The pattern is too clear, the record is too documented, and the community watching this situation is too informed to be managed by an injury report.
The only question that remains is whether anyone inside that organization has the institutional courage to reckon honestly with what the full record of their own behavior has produced. Based on everything observed this season, that reckoning is not coming, but the documentation of why it should is going to keep building, one incident at a time, until the weight of it becomes impossible for anyone to ignore. Cunningham passed, Clark scored, the organization responded, and everyone saw it.